The noose swung lazily in the dusty breeze, and Eliza Monroe felt its shadow crawl across her face like a vulture's wing. She wasn't guilty, God above knew it, but the town had already tried her in whispers, and the gallows had been built before the sheriff even called her name. And now, standing at the edge of the crowd, half in the light and half in the dark, was the one man she hadn't expected. Tahu, the Apache scout, who owed no allegiance to anyone but the truth. His eyes, dark, unflinching, held hers, and she knew in that instant that his presence meant only one thing. He was here to take her away. The air was dry as bone, the sky split by the shrill cry of a hawk. Boots scuffed in the dirt around her, men whispering that she'd poisoned cattle, burned wagons, maybe even killed. Lies layered on lies, because she'd spoken too boldly about land and fairness in a town that preferred silence. Her father had been a rancher, respected until the day a banker took their spread for unpaid debts. Eliza never forgot how quickly friends turned away when she protested. 10 years later, she was a woman of 30, unwed, strong of will, and stubborn as a mule. Some men called her a troublemaker. Some called her worse. But none could prove a thing, none. Except now they had the word of a drifter who'd claimed to see her near a fire that gutted 2 freight wagons last week. It was enough for the sheriff, eager for someone to blame, to call her guilty. And then there was Tahu. He stepped forward from the crowd, tall, shoulders squared, his long black hair bound loosely with rawhide. Beads of turquoise and bone glimmered faintly in the sun along the strap across his chest. His presence silenced the murmurs. People respected him, feared him even, for his tracking skills and his uncanny ability to read truth in a man's eyes. But Eliza saw something no one else did: hesitation. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice low but steady. "You'll come with me." The crowd shifted eagerly, some smirking, some sneering, their verdict already spoken in the curl of their lips. But Eliza's heart wasn't pounding from fear of prison. It was from the glint in Tahu's eyes. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel. He was torn. "Tahu," she whispered, not loud enough for the crowd, but enough for him. "You know I didn't do this." His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching at the corner. He didn't answer. The sheriff leaned on the hitching post, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Do your duty, Scout. Bring her in. Let the law have its say." "Law?" Eliza nearly laughed. The law had already spoken in the gossip of saloons and the quick hands that hammered together gallows wood. This wasn't law, it was vengeance dressed in a badge. Tahu stepped closer, his shadow falling across her boots. She smelled the faint leather and smoke on him, the scent of long rides across desert country. He bound her wrists with rawhide cord, his touch firm but not cruel. His fingers brushed her skin for the briefest second, and the shock of it sent heat rising to her face. The crowd jeered. "Finally, someone shuts the woman up." One man shouted. Another spat near her skirts. Eliza lifted her chin, refusing to bow her head. If she was going to be led through town like a criminal, she would do it with pride. Tahu's grip on her arm was steady, but his voice, when he leaned close, was barely a whisper. "Walk? Don't fight me here." Something in his tone stopped her breath. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. They moved through the street together, dust rising around their boots, the murmur of the crowd trailing behind them like the hiss of snakes. Horses whinnied at the hitching posts, restless under the weight of the moment. Eliza's eyes darted to the hills beyond town, the red cliffs standing tall against the horizon. Freedom was out there, wild and waiting. But here, in the heart of the settlement, her fate was shackled to men's lies. She stole a glance up at Tahu. His face was carved of stone, but his eyes, dark as midnight rivers, burned with something deeper: conflict, regret, and maybe, just maybe, defiance. By the time they reached the edge of town, The sound of hammering echoed again. More wood being nailed. More gallows rising. Eliza swallowed hard. She was innocent. But in this town, innocence didn't matter, and the only man who could save her was the same man now leading her toward her prison. The sound of the town faded behind them, swallowed by the wide silence of the prairie. Only the creak of leather saddles and the steady clop of hooves filled the air as Tahu rode ahead, Eliza's wrists bound and tied to the horn of her borrowed horse. Dust swirled around their boots, the horizon shimmering in the late afternoon heat. Eliza kept her chin high, though the rope cut at her skin. Every heartbeat hammered with anger, not fear. She had faced worse than whispers and shackles. She had faced betrayal before. But the sting now was sharper, because it came from him. "You know, I didn't do this," she said finally, her voice steady but edged like broken glass. Tahu didn't look at her. His gaze stayed forward, scanning the red ridges in the distance where the desert began to rise into jagged stone. His horse moved with the unhurried grace of a predator. "I know many things," he answered at last. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like a river that hides its depth. But knowing and proving are not the same. Eliza's laugh was bitter. "So that's it? You'll hand me over to their gallows just to keep your word with the sheriff?" He slowed his horse, turning slightly so his eyes met hers. Dark, steady, unblinking. "I gave my word. Without it, I am nothing." The words hit her harder than a whip. He meant them. Duty was not something he wore like a badge. Duty was carved into him like scars. Yet she saw the flicker there, the hesitation that had shadowed his eyes in town. They rode on, the silence stretching between them. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow darting across the sunburnt ground. Far ahead the low hills beckoned, dotted with mesquite and sage. Eliza's wrists ached from the rope, but pride kept her from complaining. Instead, she studied him, the breadth of his shoulders, the way the muscles in his back shifted as he guided his horse, the necklace of turquoise and bone catching light at every turn. He was a man carved from another world, yet here he was, bound to the law of men who would never accept him. "You don't belong to them," she said softly. His head tilted slightly, but he didn't turn. "And you don't belong in chains." The words hung between them like sparks from a fire. Eliza felt her throat tighten. "Then why? Why ride me into a death sentence when you know it's wrong?" At that, he stopped his horse completely. The sudden stillness made the air feel heavy, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. He turned to her, eyes sharp. "Because if I don't, they'll come for you with rope and fire. The mob will burn you alive, Eliza. This way, maybe the law buys us time. Double quotes us. She caught it. He hadn't said you, he'd said us. The realization curled through her like a flame, equal parts hope and danger. She tested the rope binding her wrists, twisting slightly, and winced as it cut deeper. Tahu dismounted, moving with the silence of a predator. He approached her, his shadow falling over her in the sinking sun. Without a word, he pulled a knife from his belt and held it close not to her throat, but to the rope. Her heart stuttered. Was he going to free her? But instead of cutting through, he pressed the blade just enough to loosen the knot, easing the pressure so her wrist stopped bleeding. His fingers brushed her skin again, steady, careful. His touch was both gentleness and steel. "You'll live," he said, slipping the knife back into its sheath. Eliza swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want me to beg for my life, Tahu?" His gaze locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. "I want you to fight for it. But not here, not yet." The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke campfires from the outlaw camp rumored to roam near the canyon. Tahu's expression hardened. "We ride fast. They're not the only ones hunting you." And with that, he swung back onto his horse, urging it into a gallop. Eliza clutched the horn of her saddle. dust rising around them as the desert stretched wide and endless, a cruel stage for the impossible choice that lay ahead. The prairie wind carried more than dust that afternoon. A faint whistle, almost too subtle to hear, prickled at Tahu's senses. He had ridden these lands for years, tracking the unseen, reading the whisper of grass and the shadow of hills. "Something was wrong, Eliza," he said, voice low and steady. "Stay close to me. Keep your head down." Her chest heaved from the gallop, and her wrists were raw where the rope had cut. "What is it?" she asked, voice trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the horizon, the hills behind them, the scrubland ahead. His eyes, dark and sharp, caught movement, a ripple in the dust, a glint of metal, the unmistakable shadow of men crouching behind rocks. Outlaws or worse townsfolk who didn't want her alive to prove her innocence. "They're coming," Tahu said finally, shifting his horse so he rode slightly ahead. "Hide behind me." Eliza's stomach knotted. She had faced the mob in town, but she had never felt danger this close. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder, faint but unmistakable. Shots rang out, splitting the air. A bullet thudded into the dirt at her horse's hooves, sending sparks of rock flying. The sudden chaos made her gasp, gripping the saddle horn tighter. Tahu's horse whinnied, muscles rippling as he kicked it into a gallop, his bare chest gleaming with sweat and tension. "Eliza, down?" he shouted, his long black hair whipping behind him. She ducked instinctively, feeling the rush of air from another bullet. He swung his body like a shield, moving between her and the shots, guiding her with one firm hand on her shoulder. Every movement was precise, controlled muscle, instinct, and courage fused together. A rock kicked up by a stray hoof narrowly missed her. Tahu's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning for the attackers. The outlaws had underestimated him, assumed he would merely follow orders. They hadn't counted on a warrior who could read the land like an open book, who moved with the silent precision of the desert wind. "Eliza, when I say run, you run straight for the mesa." He barked out. The chaos pressed in on them, dust, the smell of sweat and gunpowder, the metallic tang of fear. Eliza's mind raced. She had survived life on the ranch, bitter betrayals, and the sting of unjust rumors, but nothing like this. And yet, there was something about Tahu here strong, protective, unyielding, that made her believe they could escape. "On my mark," he whispered. Time slowed. The ground seemed to tremble under the pounding of hooves and heartbeats. Tahu's hand tightened on the reins, guiding them over a narrow rocky path that wound toward a rise in the hills. His bare muscles gleamed with the effort of each movement, his skin and jewelry catching the sun with every turn. Eliza now. She leaned into the saddle, trusting him completely. The path narrowed, rocks scraping their boots, dust blinding, and he pushed both horses to the limit. Bullets sang past, one striking Tahu's horse's flank, making it rear. But Tahu's skill was unmatched. He calmed the animal instantly, a low hiss in his teeth, and kept them moving forward. Finally, they reached the mesa, a narrow ledge overlooking the valley below. Tahu dismounted, brushing sweat and dust from his bare chest heaving, eyes blazing with a mixture of relief and lingering alertness. "Eliza, stay behind the rocks." "Breathe," he instructed, his voice softening as he glanced at her dot. She slid off her horse, legs shaking, hands still raw. The fear was fading, replaced by awe. He had risked everything to keep her alive, his loyalty and skill undeniable. "You saved me," she said quietly, staring into his dark eyes. Tahu's lips pressed into a hard line, but there was a flicker of something unspoken. Duty, honor, and desire tangled together in the heat of the afternoon. "I will always protect the innocent," he said, voice low, almost a vow. Eliza's gaze softened. understanding for the first time that this man was bound not just by duty, but by a code older and fiercer than law. And somewhere deep inside, she realized she was no longer alone. Above them, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert floor, turning the landscape gold and crimson. The chase wasn't over, but for a moment, they had survived. And in the silence of the mesa, the impossible choice lingered between them like the hot desert wind. Tahu could obey the law or defy it to save her. The canyon walls rose around them like ancient sentinels, red stone glowing in the late afternoon sun. The air smelled of sage and earth, and the wind whispered secrets through the narrow passage. Tahu guided them carefully along a hidden trail only he could see, muscles taut, eyes scanning every shadow. Eliza's heart still pounded from the ambush. Her wrist sore, but her mind alert. "You'll be safe here. For now," Tahu said, his voice low, steady, carrying the authority of someone who had lived in these lands all his life. He stopped at a small plateau, the mesa dropping sharply behind them, revealing a valley hidden from the main trail. A stream glimmered below, fed by a trickle of water winding through the rocks. Eliza slid from her horse, stretching her stiff limbs. This is beautiful," she said, awe breaking through her fear. "I never imagined land like this existed beyond the town." Tahu's lips pressed into a thin line. "The land doesn't belong to anyone who cannot read it. Every rock, every curve in the canyon. It speaks to those who listen." She studied him, noting how his bare chest glistened with sweat, how his long black hair clung to the lines of his face, and the way turquoise beads and bone caught the light as he moved. There was a wildness to him that both frightened and fascinated her. But it wasn't just his appearance. His presence commanded respect, trust, and something more, something she couldn't name. They followed a narrow path to a small overhang where the rocks created a natural shelter. Tahu gestured for her to sit on a flat boulder while he knelt by the stream, cupping water in his hands and offering it to her. She drank slowly, savoring the cool relief after the dust and heat of the chase. "You've been running for more than the law," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the stream. "I can see it in your shoulders, your hands, the way you carry yourself," Eliza swallowed. "I've had to fight to survive my whole life," she admitted. "First my family's land was taken, then the town decided I was their enemy. I've learned that to stand for what's right. You're always in danger," Tahu nodded, his gaze softening. "And yet you stand. That is courage. I respect it." For a moment, the canyon held only them, the sound of water trickling, the wind in the crevices, the distant cry of a hawk. Eliza felt her tension ease slightly, though her pulse still raced. There was an unspoken understanding between them. He had saved her life twice now, yet every act of protection drew him closer to a choice he could not escape. "Why do you help me?" she asked, voice almost a whisper. "You could turn me in any time." He studied the stones at his feet, fingers tracing the edge of the stream. "Because some things are greater than law," he said finally. "Some choices are about honor, not orders. And right now, you are more than law. You are truth." Eliza's chest tightened, words failing her. Truth. It was a dangerous thing, a fragile thing, and yet she had always known it. She had always fought for it. And now, somehow, Tahu recognized it too. The wind shifted again, carrying faint traces of smoke from a distant fire. Danger was never far in this land, but for the first time she felt the faintest taste of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. Maybe she could trust him. Tahu rose, scanning the horizon, every muscle coiled, alert. "We cannot linger. The town will not give up easily. And there are others who wish to see you captured. Or worse." Eliza followed him along the narrow ledge, heart steadying with each step. Behind every red cliff and twisted juniper, The world seemed alive, as if the canyon itself was conspiring to protect them. As the sun began to dip, painting the cliffs gold and crimson, Eliza realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She was not alone. And as she looked at Tahu, standing strong and bare-chested against the dying light, she understood that some bonds were forged not by choice, but by circumstance, and some loyalties demanded more than courage. They demanded sacrifice. And Tahu had already given enough to risk everything. The night had fallen like a velvet curtain over the canyon, shadows stretching across the red rock like dark fingers. A crescent moon hung low, casting pale light on the narrow trail Tahu had chosen to hide them. Campfires from distant outlaws flickered on the horizon, a reminder that danger never slept. "Eliza, keep close," Tahu whispered, voice steady as he scanned the darkened terrain. His bare chest glistened with sweat and moonlight, muscles taut with every step. The tribal jewelry around his neck and shoulders shimmered faintly, catching the glow of the firelight in the distance. She followed him silently, knees stiff from hours of riding, heart pounding from the adrenaline of the ambush earlier. "How do you know these lands so well?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Tahu's gaze never wavered. "I have lived here longer than most. Every ridge, every hidden path, every shadow, I know them. It is how I survive, and how I protect those who cannot protect themselves." Eliza's breath caught. He wasn't just talking about the desert. She could feel the weight of it in his eyes, in the way he moved, in the fierce intensity of his presence. Suddenly, a twig snapped beneath a boot too close to their hiding place. Tahu's hand shot to the knife at his belt, muscles coiling like springs. "Stay behind me," he ordered, tone sharp. From the darkness, figures emerged, rough men cloaked in dust and shadows, eyes glinting with malice. Outlaws or hired mercenaries from the town. The scent of smoke and leather filled the air. Eliza felt her stomach twist, but she did not falter. She knew Tahu would not allow them to be taken. He stepped forward, bare feet on rock, body poised like a panther ready to strike. "I warned you," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to the men, but each word carried the force of thunder. "You do not touch her." A man lunged, knife raised. Tahu moved like lightning, twisting his body, grabbing the man's wrist and flipping him over the rocks with precise strength. Another drew a gun. Tahu's hand shot out, knocking the barrel aside, the force of his movement sending the attacker sprawling. His bare skin gleamed in the moonlight, muscles rippling with each motion, eyes dark and unflinching. Eliza's pulse raced. She had never seen such skill, such raw, controlled power. And yet, beneath it, she sensed restraint. He could crush them all, but he fought only to protect, not to kill. The last man hesitated, glancing at Tahu's unyielding figure. "Back off," Tahu growled, voice low and dangerous. The outlaws faltered, fear breaking the arrogance in their eyes. They melted into the shadows, leaving the canyon echoing with silence and dust. Eliza sank to the ground, shaking from fear and relief. Tahu crouched beside her, hand brushing her shoulder, grounding her in the aftermath. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, voice trembling. "No." "Thanks to you." He studied her, eyes softened by the moonlight but still sharp with the vigilance of a warrior. "You are stronger than you know. That is why I protect you." She looked at him, heart pounding not from fear but from something deeper, something dangerous, a trust, an admiration, a connection that grew with each moment they shared. "You risk everything for me?" she said quietly. "Yes," he replied simply, standing and stretching his shoulders, his bare chest and arms outlined against the canyon walls. "Because some things are worth more than duty. Some lives are worth more than orders. And you are one of them." The wind shifted again, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and sage. Eliza realized that the desert, vast and unforgiving, could be both a cage and a sanctuary. And in Tahu, she had found a protector who lived by a code older than law, older than fear, older than vengeance. As they moved further into the canyon, shadows deepened and stars began to scatter across the sky, the impossible choice hanging between them. Tahu could obey the law and turn her in, or defy it and risk everything to keep her alive. And for the first time, Eliza understood the depth of what he had already chosen. Dawn broke over the canyon like a promise, soft pink and gold brushing the jagged cliffs. The air smelled of desert sage and sun-warmed stone. Tahu led Eliza along a hidden trail, muscles taut, movements precise. Each step was calculated, his bare chest glistening with the morning dew, the turquoise and bone of his tribal jewelry catching the light. Behind them, the canyon stretched wide, a labyrinth of shadows and sunlit peaks. "Eliza," he said quietly, voice calm yet urgent, "we're close to the valley. There, you'll be safe?" For now. Her wrists were free, but her body still ached from hours of riding and fear. "Safe?" she asked, scanning the horizon. "After everything, can anywhere really be safe for me?" He glanced at her, eyes dark and unreadable. "Safe enough to breathe. Safe enough to plan our next move. And maybe safe enough to trust me." The canyon remained quiet for a long stretch, broken only by the faint rush of water far below. Tahu paused at a narrow ledge overlooking the valley, the early sun turning the red cliffs into a blaze of fire. He crouched, studying the terrain. "We cannot linger. They will send others. The town is not patient, and neither are the men who hunt you." Eliza studied him closely, the way his muscles moved beneath bronzed skin, the way his long black hair fell over his shoulders. He carried strength and grace, power and precision, yet she sensed a vulnerability beneath it all, a conflict he refused to voice. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. "You could turn me in at any moment." "And yet—" she hesitated, searching his eyes. "Yet you don't." Tahu's gaze softened for the briefest instant. "Because some things are worth more than orders. Some choices are older than law. Some lives are worth protecting, even when it breaks every rule." Before she could respond, movement flickered in the distance, a group of riders, dust kicking up as they barreled toward the canyon. Townsfolk? Outlaws? She couldn't tell. Tahu's hand went to the knife at his belt, his body coiling like a panther ready to strike. "They come for you," he said, tone low but fierce. "Hold behind me. Move only when I tell you." Eliza obeyed instinctively, crouching behind a rock while he stood, chest bare, muscles gleaming in the early sunlight. He faced them head-on, unflinching, as the riders slowed, realizing the canyon was no ordinary path. Tahu's presence alone radiated power, authority, and a warning that they had underestimated him. One of the riders broke from the group, spurring his horse toward them. Tahu's long black hair whipped in the wind as he moved, bare chest and arms flexing with effortless strength. With a swift motion, he intercepted the rider, knocking the weapon aside and spinning him over the rocks with precise skill. Eliza's heart raced. She had never seen such controlled force, such raw power tempered by discipline. And yet, beneath it all, he held back not to show dominance, but to protect her. The remaining riders hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. Tahu's gaze burned into them, the turquoise and bone of his jewelry glinting like warning flames. Slowly they turned and fled, leaving dust and echoes in their wake. Eliza exhaled, trembling. Tahu approached, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, voice low and steady. "I think so," she whispered. "Thanks to you." He nodded once, eyes dark with thought, muscles still coiled from readiness. The law may call me a scout, a man of orders, but some laws do not protect the innocent. That is why I am here. That is why I chose you over duty. Eliza's chest tightened. She understood, in that moment, the depth of his conflict, the impossible choice between obedience and morality, between honor and the heart. And she realized something else he had already chosen, not just for her survival, but for their bond, fragile and fierce, forged in the desert and danger dot as the sun climbed higher. Illuminating the canyon in blazing red and gold, they moved further into the valley, hidden and yet exposed to the vast world around them. Each step carried weight, danger, and a fragile hope. Tahu led, and she followed two souls bound by trust, peril, and the impossible choice that neither could ignore. The day ahead promised challenges, but for the first time, Eliza felt a spark of certainty. With Tahu, she might not just survive. She might finally find a place where justice and loyalty could coexist. The sun hung low over the canyon, bleeding gold and crimson across the jagged cliffs. Tahu and Eliza moved cautiously through the valley, every step alert, every sound measured. The distant town and its mob were still out there, but now something else awaited truth, reckoning, and the impossible choice Tahu had wrestled with since the moment he stepped into the crowd to arrest her. "Eliza," he whispered, voice tight, carrying the weight of every decision he'd made for her. "This is where we stand. What happens next will decide everything for both of us." She met his gaze, eyes wide but steady, heart racing not with fear but with trust. "Then let's make it count," she said quietly. They had reached the edge of a narrow gorge, a place Tahu knew well. Below, a hidden path led to the river, a natural barrier the town's men would never anticipate. But danger was never far, and he knew the sheriff would not rest until she was in chains. The first shots rang out from above a scouting party, following their trail. Tahu moved with the precision of a hunter, muscles taut and coiled, chest bare, tribal jewelry glinting faintly in the fading sunlight. His long black hair streamed behind him as he shifted, using the rocks for cover while keeping Eliza protected. "Eliza, stay low. Do exactly as I say," he instructed, voice firm but calm. She pressed herself against the stone wall, watching him, awestruck by his presence. Every motion was calculated, every movement a mix of raw power and unwavering control. He deflected a rifle with the butt of his knife, then kicked another assailant over the edge of the gorge, keeping the attackers at bay with a combination of speed and strength few could match. When the last man hesitated, Tahu's eyes blazed, dark and unyielding. "Leave, now!" The threat of death hung in the air, and the remaining attackers fled, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they vanished into the canyon's shadows. Eliza exhaled slowly, trembling, and Tahu approached, brushing dust from her prairie dress. "You are safe," he said quietly. Though his muscles still tensed, eyes scanning every shadow dot, Eliza reached for his hand, the first act of intimacy she had allowed herself since he had first stepped into the town square. "You saved me," she whispered. More than once. Tahu's jaw tightened, and for a long moment the silence of the canyon pressed in on them. "It was not just saving you," he admitted. "It was the choice to defy the law when the law could not see truth. You are innocent, and that matters more to me than any badge or oath." Tears pricked Eliza's eyes, not of fear, but of relief and something deeper, admiration, gratitude, and a growing trust that ran deeper than words could express. She understood the risk he had taken, the impossible choice he had made. They followed the hidden path to the river, the sound of rushing water a promise of freedom. Tahu led her carefully, muscles rippling as he navigated slippery rocks, every step protective. When they reached the riverbank, he paused, letting her drink from the clear, Cold water. Double quotes Eliza, the town will not give up easily, he said, eyes dark and resolute. But for now, we have a chance. A chance to start again. She looked at him, feeling the weight of the moment, and nodded. A chance. With you. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and earth. In that moment, danger was still out there. Law and vengeance still threatened to chase them, but for the first time, Eliza felt hope. Not just survival, but a connection she had never dared to imagine. Tahu stood beside her, chest bare, muscular arms glinting under the sun, long black hair whipping in the breeze, tribal jewelry shimmering with every movement. He had chosen her over duty, loyalty over fear, and in doing so, had not just protected her life, but had forged a bond neither desert nor law could sever. Together, they turned toward the river, toward freedom and a world beyond judgment, beyond suspicion, where trust and honor defined them, not a mob, not the sheriff, not the chains of a town that had never understood her. And as the canyon swallowed their footprints, leaving only dust and echoes behind, Eliza understood fully the depth of the impossible choice Tahu had made. He had risked everything for her, and in the harsh heart of the desert, love, trust, and courage had won. The river shimmered, the canyon glowed, and two souls, bound by danger and honor, stepped forward into a future neither had dared to hope for.